Good evening. Good evening. Erev Tov. Good evening. It's actually wonderful when people are talking and engaging in lively conversations, but I need to interrupt these conversations, get us started, and then we will continue with more conversations following our program tonight. Good evening. My name is Natalia Aleksiun. I'm Harowitz Professor of Holocaust Studies and Interim Director of the Bad Shorstein Center for Jewish Studies. And it is a profound honor for me to welcome you all. Thank you for coming for this evening program, the lecture by Dr. Joanna Sliwa, entitled How One Jewish Woman Defied the Nazis. But we gather tonight on a particular day in observance of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, established in 2005 by the United States General Assembly. It marks the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it's a solemn day to commemorate the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered in the Holocaust, and to remember millions of others who were persecuted and killed under the Nazi regime. At the Bad Shorstein Center for Jewish Studies, we are deeply committed to teaching the critical lessons of the Holocaust and examining its complex historical legacy and enduring influence on Jewish culture and memory. We affirm the rigorous education and scholarly inquiry as essential ways not only to understanding the historical events themselves, but also the lived experience of victims and survivors. I would like to express my gratitude, our gratitude, to our partners and hosts tonight who made this wonderful event, this meaningful evening possible. Hillel of the University of Florida, with Rabbi Jonah Zinn and Jamie Zinn, who helped put this together. The Jewish Council of North Central Florida, Temple Shil Shalom, and Women's Sisterhood of Bnei Israel Congregation. And it is now my privilege to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Joanna Sliwa, who is historian of the Holocaust and of Polish Jewish history. Dr. Sliwa is the author of several acclaimed books and numerous scholarly articles. Her first monograph, Jewish Childhood in Krakow, a microhistory of the Holocaust, received the Wiener Holocaust Library's prestigious Ernst Frankel Award and was named a 2022 Choice Outstanding Academic Title in Central and Eastern European Studies. Her second book, co-authored with Elizabeth White, published now in multiple languages, I don't know how many translations to date, and her forthcoming book, forthcoming volume, Older Jews and the Holocaust, which will be published, I think, in the coming months by Wayne State University Press. And I'm lucky to have the counterfeit Countess, and I highly recommend for you to get your own volume. Dr. Sliwa also serves as administrator of the Saul Kagan Fellowship for Advanced Shoah Studies and the University Partnership Program in Holocaust Studies at the Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, known as the Claims Conference. And these are two roles which really ensure that there will be another generation of scholars of the Holocaust, of Shoah, teaching and researching at American and other universities. This evening, Dr. Sliwa will guide us through a powerful and moving story of courage and defiance. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Joanna Sliwa.
Right? Thank you, Professor Alekshun, Natalia. I will not pretend that we don't know each other, that we're not friends. Thank you so much for this very generous, kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today to honor International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I would like to thank the Shorstein Center for Jewish Studies and all the partners for the invitation and for making this event possible. I am grateful to Professor Natalia Alekshun, who instantly recognized the importance of the story that I will tell you about today. Professor Alekshun's research on Polish Jewish history and the Holocaust, especially in what used to be Eastern Poland before World War II and is now Western Ukraine, informs the work of scholars around the world, as it does my own work, including on the topic that I will talk about. And the University of Florida occupies a special place in how this history came to light. So when historian of World War II, Professor Arthur Leighton Funk, perused the 1989 schedule of the American Historical Association's conference in San Francisco, one presentation caught his eye. Dr. Elizabeth Barry White, a historian in the Office of Special Investigations of the United States Department of Justice, would speak about Majdanek, a former concentration camp in German-occupied Poland. At the event, Professor Funk learned that Dr. White was not only one of the few American historians at the time who was researching this Nazi camp, she was also tracking down former Nazis living in the United States. And he thought he had found just the person he was looking for. It so happened that Professor Funk was entrusted with a document and a mission by his colleague, Professor Henry Mellberg. The two men met at the University of Florida. So here is the UF connection. Both Funk and Mellberg had been professors at UF in the 1970s. Funk held a professorship in the history department, which he also chaired, and Mellberg was a research professor in the philosophy department, where he moved from his position at the University of Chicago in 1970. Mellberg secured this appointment with the help of another colleague from UF, Professor Charles Morris, who was a prominent philosopher. And so here you see a letter that Mellberg wrote to a fellow professor, Rudolf Carnap, another prominent philosopher at UCLA, happily announcing his appointment at UF. And here, you see the announcement from UF about Mellberg's hiring, and this is with gratitude to the university archives for sharing this announcement, the only document in the archives about Henry Mellberg. So Henry Mellberg had been trying to interest a publisher in the memoir of his late wife, Professor Josephine Janina Mellberg. And in the preface to her memoir, he called her a heroine of Majdanek. And when Mellberg met Funk, he saw hope that a historian would be able to succeed where the philosopher failed. Henry Mellberg passed away in Gainesville in 1979, and Arthur Funk promised to make the World War II activities and survival of Mellberg's wife widely known. So Funk approached a prominent American Holocaust historian, whose name shall not be named, and that historian said that perhaps the story was interesting, but a story of one woman did not necessarily merit a publication. Oh, yes. So what did Funk do? He did not give up. He persevered. And after Dr. White's panel at the historical conference that I mentioned earlier, Funk approached this young historian and handed her a carbon copy of the manuscript. And here you see the first page on which Funk wrote his contact information. He explained that this was a true story of a Polish Jewish woman who went by the name Janina Melberg. Janina Melberg claimed in this memoir that she survived the Holocaust in German-occupied Poland under the false identity of Countess Suchodolska, a Polish Christian aristocrat. And using this guise, she became an official of a Polish relief organization in the city of Lublin. And this map shows you German-occupied Poland during World War or German-occupied, yes, and Lublin was both a city and a district in what was called the general government, so the areas that Germany occupied. Thanks to her fluent German and aristocratic status, the Countess negotiated with Nazi and SS officials in Lublin for measures to help Poles. It seemed from her memoir that she never took no as a final answer, but would even go over the officials' heads until she found one who would say yes. And when she was told yes, she considered it an invitation to ask for even more. One focus of Janina's work was providing aid to prisoners at Majdanek. This was a Nazi concentration camp located at the edge of the city of Lublin. Eventually, her organization delivered massive quantities of food for thousands of prisoners 5 days a week. Such a program did not exist in any other concentration camp. And what is more, Janina made these deliveries herself and persuaded the SS to let her take them inside the camp, right up to the gates of the 5 prisoner compounds, which are here marked as fields. And once she obtained access, she used her deliveries as cover to smuggle messages with resistance members who were imprisoned in the camp. Because she was also an officer in the home army of the Polish resistance. And she didn't just smuggle messages. She brought in books to a concentration camp, medical equipment, and razor blades and wire cutters to organize escapes. This is some of the information that Dr. White, whom I will from now on call Barry, read in the memoir. As you can imagine, she was astonished, to say the least. Barry had no way of verifying Janina's story at the time. She was working full-time. There was no internet. Hard to imagine for some of us, for some in the audience, I'm sure, no internet. The archives in communist Poland were closed, and Barry did not know Polish. By 2017, Barry asked herself if she was the only person who knew that Countess Janina Suchodolska was Jewish, even if there was no archival evidence to support it. And if she was the only person, did she have a responsibility to tell this story? So in 2018, Barry connected with me, and the result of our research is the book published in 2024 that Natalia also showed. Barry and I corroborated Janina's memoir with archival records. We also discovered that Janina's life and activities were even more amazing than what she presented in her memoir. So what did we learn? In 1939, 34-year-old Janina and a year older Henry Melberg lived a comfortable life of intellectuals in Lvov, today Lviv, Ukraine. She was a mathematics teacher, and he taught French. They were educated at the prestigious university in Lvov, where they earned doctorates in philosophy. This photograph is from 1925, and it shows some of the students in Janina's year class. And Janina is identified on this photograph as Peppy Spinner. Why? Well, that was the name her Jewish parents gave her. Janina grew up in a small town in what today is Ukraine and what used to be Poland before World War II. And because of her family's status, she was educated by private tutors, and she mingled with members of the local nobility. That is how she acquired the languages, the mannerisms, and behavior that would later help her fool the Nazis. When Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union invaded Poland and divided it amongst themselves, Lviv fell to the Soviets. The Soviet authorities deported thousands of people whom they deemed enemies of the state. Janina managed to avoid deportations to Siberia and a confiscation of her and her husband's property. When Soviet soldiers came to inspect the Melberg's apartment, Janina persuaded the soldiers that she and her husband were just lowly teachers and they came from working class families, which was not true, of course. In June 1941, their situation changed again. German forces occupied Lviv. The local Ukrainian population staged a series of pogroms against the Jewish neighbors, murdering even as many as 4,000. And soon, German forces organized regular roundups and shootings of Jews. Janina managed to save her husband from one of them. She followed a group of men being led by Ukrainian militiamen. She was so stubborn in her request to release her husband that caught the interest of a German soldier. And so he assured her that Henry would be released. And he returned home. This situation taught Janina the need to remain proud, persistent, and refrain from judging people. But then they asked themselves, the Malbergs, how long would they be able to survive? So when a German order was plastered throughout the city, ordering Jews to enter into a newly created ghetto, the Malbergs understood that this could spell the end for them. Janina's family friend came to the Malbergs' rescue. Count Andrzej Skrzyński, whom you see getting married for the fourth time after the war, arrived in Lviv on the first civilian train from Lublin. He promised to smuggle the Malbergs to Lublin, to give them false papers, and to protect them. Their journey to Lublin was dangerous because as Jews, the Malbergs could not use public transportation. And yet, Skrzyński's smuggling mission was successful, until it almost wasn't. At the train station in Lublin, a German policeman detained Henry, saying that he broke a baggage regulation. So Janina sprang to action. She mustered all her courage to confront the policeman and urge him to demand that he releases Henry. Her ruse worked. It was that incident that enabled her reinvention into the Countess, who would face Nazi officials in Lublin, first to permit and then to extend relief efforts for non-Jewish Poles. And it was in Lublin that Count Skrzyński gave the Malbergs their false identities as Polish Christian aristocrats, Count Piotr and Countess Janina Suchodolska. Life in Lublin was certainly not easy for the Malbergs. German-occupied Poland became the laboratory for the Nazis to develop and test their racist utopia. By the end of 1939, special task forces called Einsatzgruppen shot about 40,000 Poles and 7,000 Polish Jews in a plan to eliminate Poland's intelligentsia. A massive ethnic cleansing campaign followed. The German authorities planned to move even as many as 8 million Poles and Jews from the areas that Germany annexed to German-occupied Poland. German forces destroyed and looted Poland's cultural and national treasures. They sent Poles for forced labor. So the fact that Janina and Henry hid their Jewish identities did not mean that they were free from persecution. Now they faced Nazi anti-Polish policy. It was brutal, but it was less deadly than Nazi policy against the Jews. By the time the Melbergs arrived in Lublin in December 1941, the 40,000 Jews living there had been confined in a ghetto for 9 months. And here you see 2 images from the ghetto. In mid-March 1942, in Lublin, the German authorities inaugurated Operation Reinhard. It was the largest mass murder operation of the Holocaust that claimed the lives of nearly 2 million Jews. Within a month, the Germans murdered 28,000 Jews from Lublin and transferred the remaining ones to a new ghetto on the outskirts of the city. Janina witnessed the tragedy of the Jews, and she understood that this too could be her fate. So she resolved to help those whom she could and as much as she could. Count Skrzyński sponsored Janina's membership into the Polish Home Army, the military wing of the Polish underground state. This was a secret resistance organization in German-occupied Poland that answered to the Polish government in exile in London. Janina assumed the alias Stefania, with which she signed her memos and reports that were intended for the underground. And on this note here, you have it's her handwritten note signed by her alias Stefania. She also became Skrzyński's right hand in the Main Welfare Council. This was an organization that was approved by the German authorities to assist only non-Jewish Poles. This meant helping victims of various German actions and expulsions, interceding for the release of hostages, providing food to those held in prisons and camps, but also ensuring food, clothes, and medicine for civilians who are in need, children and adults. And while Janina was involved in those endeavors, she also focused on a daring goal. In 1942, Majdanek was mainly a camp for able-bodied Jews. These were victims of Operation Reinhard, who were spared the gas chambers of the killing centers. They were slave laborers in the camp, and once they could no longer work, they were murdered in Majdanek's gas chambers and shooting pits. Majdanek also served as a killing center when transports of Jews arrived and the men, women, and children underwent selections and gassings. In 1943, the SS sent thousands of ethnic Polish prisoners to Majdanek. And like the Jewish prisoners, when the Poles became too starved or too ill to work, they were murdered. The conditions at Majdanek were so horrific that it had by far the highest prisoner mortality rate out of all concentration camps, including Auschwitz. So here you see a photograph from the time of prisoners doing slave labor. And here you see a column of smoke rising over Majdanek from the incineration of thousands of its victims' bodies. It's the one photograph that we have from that time. In February 1943, Janina's organization finally received permission to deliver food and medicine for 6,000 ethnic Polish prisoners in Majdanek. Skrzyński, the count who rescued the Melbergs, put Janina in charge of the relief program. She became obsessed with finding ways to help all of Majdanek's prisoners, including the Jews, no matter the risks to herself. She dreamed of delivering enough food to stave off starvation and of providing medicines that would eradicate the raging epidemics. And she wanted to do more to strengthen the prisoners' will to survive by letting them know that they were not forgotten and by giving them hope. So over and over again, she went to Majdanek to press the SS for permission to make larger and more frequent deliveries of more kinds of supplies. She learned to navigate the German bureaucracy. And here you see some of the officials and with whom she met face to face. And among them, you'll see Hermann Hoffel right here, who was the manager of Operation Reinhardt, responsible for the murder of hundreds of thousands of Jews. Janina was stubbornly persistent in her dealings with the German officials, and she kept presenting new ideas and getting permission for them. And I would like to just mention one example. Christmas Eve, 1943. The starving prisoners at Majdanek rubbed their eyes in disbelief. They saw trucks pulling up at each of the prisoner compounds of the camp. The trucks were piled high with decorated Christmas trees. At the head of the convoy was no other than Countess Suchodolska. She had persuaded Majdanek's commandant to let the Polish prisoners celebrate the Christmas holiday. And in addition to trees, she managed to bring a sumptuous Christmas feast for them. The prisoners who experienced that Christmas at Majdanek and survived, they long remembered the celebration and the Polish aristocrat who made it possible. But what they did not know, and what the SS who ran Majdanek never discovered, was that Countess Suchodolska was not an aristocrat, and she was not Christian. She was Jewish. Janina did not work alone, of course, and her memoir pays tribute to the Poles who risked their lives alongside her to resist German occupiers and to help each other survive. And here you have the names and the photographs of some of the women with whom Janina worked, cooperated in various ways to bring aid for prisoners in Majdanek. So for example, Saturnina Malm established the first network that succeeded in getting messages and medicines into Majdanek. She also rescued a Jewish girl from the transport to the camp. The girl survived. Dr. Stefania Peżanowska was tortured by the Gestapo 15 times before she was sent to Majdanek. And in the camp, she created an infirmary that provided life-saving care to the women and children in the camp. She was also a mother to a daughter whose father was Jewish and who managed to survive on the Aryan side. So what motivated Janina to risk her life for others, to court death by going into Majdanek day after day? Henry wrote in the preface to the memoir that Janina was guided by a simple mathematical formula. And remember, she was a philosopher, but also a mathematician. And that formula was, one life has a lesser value than multiple lives. And her own life would have no value if she did not use it to save others. Henry also wrote that Janina's memoir was her testimony. And in it, she testifies not only about her wartime experiences, but also about the lessons learned from observing human nature in the midst of horrors of occupied Poland. She wrote about enemies who were participating in terrible crimes, yet who took risks to help, even save her. And she wrote about Poles who were both courageous and venal, self-sacrificing and hateful. She found that she could not predict whether someone would help or harm her in a given situation, based only on that person's ethnicity, religion, or ideology. The German rule of Lublin came to an end in July 1944, but before that happened, the German authorities deported about 1,000 prisoners from Majdanek to Auschwitz. When the Soviet army liberated Majdanek, there were about 500 remaining prisoners. So the liberation of Majdanek happened 6 months before that of Auschwitz, so on this day in 1945. The Soviet authorities publicized the horrific evidence of the genocide that they encountered in the camp. And here you have a still of one of the films that were made by Soviet journalists. And some in the West thought that this was Soviet propaganda. It couldn't be true. Janina testified to the Soviet Commission for the Investigation of Nazi Crimes. After the war, she accompanied international visitors to the former camp. She ended her memoir with a description of a tour that she took in Majdanek with a Swedish delegation. She offered insights into her motivations for not lying low to survive under a false identity, but to risk her life every day to help others. And I quote, "It would have been natural to give up, to stop going to Majdanek, to go to pieces even. But then there would have been no reason to live. When so many were in such terrible need, I had to live to answer that need. I was one individual only in the vast suffering human family. If I thought only of the dangers to myself or to those I loved, I was worth nothing. But if surviving meant being useful to many, I had to find the strength to survive, which made it possible for me to feel some sense of achievement, even of pride." When she gave that tour, Janina was still hiding her identity. She dropped the Countess title and added doctor to her name. She introduced herself as a social worker. She joined Poland's new social welfare organization, even becoming its deputy director. On the other hand, her husband, Henry, returned to his pre-war identity, and he resumed his academic career. He moved to the city of Łódź to teach at the newly created university. But Łódź also became a post-war center of revival of Jewish life. Henry registered himself and his wife using their pre-war names at the Central Committee of Jews in Poland. So they could be traced only by those who knew them from before the war. And that's how Henry's 2 surviving brothers managed to find him. These are unique photographs that were shared with Barry and me by Henry's niece, and they show a rare occasion when Janina, Henry, the 2 brothers and their wives were able to reunite. However, rising anti-Semitic violence convinced them all that they had to leave Poland. And all of them eventually did. In August 1950, Janina appeared at the Canadian military mission in Berlin, Germany. She introduced herself as Pepi Josefa Zofia Melberg. The Canadian officials expected her, and they had immigration documents ready for her. She would soon join her husband in Canada. Henry had arrived in Canada in March 1949 on an academic fellowship. He was teaching at the University of Toronto. And Janina became a research assistant. She presented herself as Dr. Josephine Janina Bednarski-Spinner Melberg, mathematician. So here were her 2 final reinventions that she made during her lifetime. In Toronto, Janina and Henry were rebuilding their professional and family lives. They survived the war in German-occupied Poland. They were able to leave communist Poland. They were free in Canada. However, there was one thing that Janina felt she could not freely share with anyone but her closest friends. Janina and Henry had known Gisela and Josef Klinghoffer, a Jewish couple, from their time in Lviv. And the Melbergs trusted the Klinghofers and could confide in them about their outrageous story of survival. Because who else would have believed the Melbergs that during the Holocaust they assumed false identities as Polish aristocrats? Who would have believed Janina that as a Polish Christian countess, she joined the Polish resistance and the Polish Relief Organization to help Polish victims of Nazi persecution? And who would have believed her that she entered the Majdanek concentration camp where 63,000 Jews were murdered, and she entered the camp to bring aid to prisoners? And would anyone find it credible that she negotiated face-to-face with top German and Nazi officials? And if she disclosed details of her wartime activities, would the people who had helped her and worked with her and still lived in Poland, would they face persecution from the communist authorities? So for many years, Janina remained silent, and in that she was not unusual among Holocaust survivors. Some survivors did not want to talk about their experiences. They focused on the present and the future, on reconstructing their lives. Some retained their wartime false identities, which demanded their silence in public. Others found that few, if anyone, who had not experienced the Holocaust showed interest in what the survivors went through and in what happened to their families and communities. So of course, there were survivors who were outspoken about their experiences, who documented them. And there were those who, like the Melbergs, discussed their losses, suffering, and survival in their native languages, in small meetings with fellow survivors. The situation changed in 1961 with the trial in Israel of Adolf Eichmann, the German official responsible for organizing the deportations of Jews to camps. The focus on the testimonies of Jewish Holocaust survivors began to break some of the silences about the horrors that they had witnessed and endured. By then, Janina found herself in a new country where no one, again except her closest pre-war friends, even knew that she was Jewish. In 1956, the Melbergs immigrated to the United States. Chicago is where they found the professional opportunities that they yearned for. Henry became a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago, and Janina rose to the rank of tenured full professor of mathematics at the Illinois Institute of Technology. She was a unicorn among women mathematicians at the time. And you see her here teaching a class at IIT in the 1960s. While Janina was focused on her life in the US, she could not ignore what was happening in her native country, Poland. The official narrative there equated the suffering of Jewish and non-Jewish Poles during World War II. It presented Poles as noble resistors and rescuers, and Jews as passive victims and ungrateful recipients of aid. Janina knew that was not only a distortion of history, but also a denial of what happened. And she knew that she had to break her silence. She decided to record some of what she saw and did during the war. And she recognized the urgency to do so, especially after March 1968. That's when the Polish communist government expelled about 30,000 Jews and the non-Jewish spouses and children, accusing them of disloyalty in a campaign it dubbed anti-Zionist, and which in fact was anti-Semitic. Ordinary Poles harassed their Jewish neighbors. Many survivors, including Janina, feared that Jews could once again be subjected to a genocide. Janina passed away in 1969 at the age of 64. The memoir that she wrote before her death was meant to dispel the Polish government's myths, to document the suffering of Jews and non-Jews in Poland as she witnessed and experienced it, and reveal a completely different side to Jewish responses to Nazi persecution. She wrote it in Polish for Polish audiences, and her husband translated the memoir to English. And still, her story remained unknown. Janina's example highlights the importance of listening to Holocaust survivors and of building bridges among people. Her experiences and recollections remind us of our common humanity with the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust. Janina's last words in the memoir are, "We will remember." And may this pledge be something we adopt this International Holocaust Remembrance Day and beyond, so that the names and histories of people who, just like us, lived, loved, struggled, and hoped to build secure lives for themselves and their families are never forgotten. And in a world that is becoming increasingly divided and oriented toward excluding the other, may Janina's stories and the stories of other survivors demonstrate the peril that we all face when we fail to confront hate and protect the dignity of every human. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this incredible story, for bringing Janina to life for us. And there is some time for a conversation and questions to the author. Please go ahead.
My question is, I know that ideology is usually what warps a movement, such as what happened with the Nazis. And so I'm wondering if what's happening today with pro-Palestine and all this, ideology, radical leftist ideology, if this will probably be the new movement again, because history tends to repeat itself, that will be the danger to Jews and even Christians or anyone that opposes that ideology. I just wonder what your thoughts might be on that.
I have to go back here and speak to the microphone, right? Yes, it's right here. Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I sometimes get those kinds of questions, and I always say that I am a Holocaust historian, and I study history. I study the past. I study people's stories to bring them to light, and so that we can learn from them. I mean, different people take different things from a story such as this, and I think this is the role that we have as historians, as writers, in sharing these stories to inspire people. So that's what I can say to that.
I have a historical question. What happened to Count Skrzyński, and did she feel at any point in acting as a countess that she could share her true identity with her Polish Christian collaborators? I mean, he knew obviously her identity, but how open was she in that small circle of people with whom she worked?
Yes, very historical questions, and I don't know if I will satisfy with the answers. But in terms of Count Andrzej Skrzyński, so he was the head of this relief organization for the specific district, and after the war, he was accused by the director of the Polish Red Cross in Lublin of collaborating with the Nazis. And that's definitely not what Count Andrzej Skrzyński did. I mean, he and Janina had to meet with all these different German officials and members of the SS for very particular reasons. Their goals were to help ethnic Poles. But Count Skrzyński couldn't stomach that accusation, and he decided to leave Lublin, and Janina took over his responsibilities. Count Skrzyński continued to live in Poland after the war. From some of the documentation that Barry and I had access to, we know that Janina visited him in Western Poland. He lived in a spa town, and she was, sick after the war, and she didn't feel well. She, went to her wartime rescuer to visit and also to get treatment in this spa town. It so happens that I am in touch with the granddaughter of Count Skrzyński, who lives in Poland, and who knew that her grandfather was involved in some relief efforts, but she didn't know anything more. She definitely did not know that he was a rescuer. He is not recognized as a righteous among the nations yet, I want to say. I would like to think that. And she's very curious about his role, and always very supportive of when I tell. And I told her that I actually we text often, and I told her that I will be here at the University of Florida speaking about the story and definitely mentioning her grandfather. So that made her very happy. In terms of who else knew, Janina does not mention that in her memoir. Definitely Skrzynski knew. If there were other people from the main welfare council, right, the relief organization, who were also aristocrats, if they knew that she was posing as an aristocrat because she needed papers, her papers also needed to pass inspection from the Nazi authorities. So she had to have some kind of strong papers to prove that. So perhaps some knew, perhaps someone had some inkling of it, but as we know, it was better not to ask, it was better not to know. Yes, please.
How was her memoir received in Poland? Did it dispel any rumors about Jews or hate and debunking the claims they made against Jewish anti-Semitism in Poland?
Thank you for this question. The question is about how was the memoir received in Poland. So the memoir is available only in the English translation, and the carbon copy of it was the one that my colleague received, and there is another copy that Professor Funk donated to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And the book that we wrote with Barry was translated into several languages, among them to Polish, and it came out in October of last year in Poland. And Barry and I traveled to Poland to meet with groups in different cities. There was a lot of interest from the Polish press, major TV stations, radio. Newspapers in this story, and the reporters always asked, why didn't we know about this story? Well, you didn't know about this story because no one really knew about this story. No one was able to corroborate it for so many years. That's why Barry thought, well, am I the only one? Should I pick it up and try to find evidence for what is in the memoir? Because she thought, well, maybe someone else will find the story, find it interesting in the archives, pick it up and try to confirm the details. But that didn't happen for decades. So it's only now coming to light, but there is interest in it. And at the Majdanek Museum and Memorial, the guides there, we had a meeting with them as well, and the guides there, they talk about, before the book, they talked about Countess Janina Suchodolska because of her involvement in providing aid. The historians at the Majdanek archives knew that there was a Countess Suchodolska. She's mentioned in the accounts of survivors from the camp, but no one knew that she was actually Jewish. So this is something new that we were able to confirm.
I wanted to ask you, I think something that you really brought across is how important for the many it is to focus on the story of one. Mm-hmm. So one person is the many. I wonder, you came across things, but I'd really, what made you so interested in this particular story? There's lots of stories unfortunately there are a lot of stories. I wish. But anyway, what got you interested in her story?
Wonderful question. Thank you. And thank you for the comment about the one story that humanizes this larger history of the Holocaust, of the 6 million. Because it's just such an abstract number, 6 million. But when we focus on one story, one particular person, then we understand what he or she went through and what happened to the family, to the community, what happened in the course of the persecution. We are able to relate to that person more. And in terms of what interested me in this particular story, so it so happens that I'm a Holocaust historian working at a Jewish organization that negotiates with the German government for compensation for Jewish Holocaust survivors. And we've been doing that since 1952. And so I read a lot of stories of survivors. During the course of my research, I've read hundreds, thousands of stories, listened to oral histories, read diaries, memoirs, and never did I encounter a story such as this one. So when Barry turned to me and asked, Joanna, would you like to take this over from me, because Barry doesn't know Polish, I do, and I said, okay, no, let's work on it. Let's work on it together. She was entrusted with the story, and as soon as I read it, I thought, this sounds like a fantasy somewhat. But we know that survival entailed those kind of miracles and irrational decisions and some things that to us may seem unbelievable. But Barry and I really wanted to find out if this story was true. And it was important for us to do that because we're historians. So we could not publish a story that we couldn't confirm in archival documents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. I'm wondering about the role of impostoring.
Mm-hmm.
So being an imposter and yet maintaining one's own identity within that. You've explained that very well for the crisis of the moment. But then when she comes to the United States, does she imposter again? And is that, because I have come across it actually in my own family, where somebody becomes an important research scholar in medicine at the University of Chicago, and I know he never went to high school. And he's he was a very important guy. And so I wonder how many times that happens. How often did people, he learned to be a doctor by being in the war and experiencing it, I won't go through the details. But so he had the experience, as she had experience that gave her the possibility of impostoring effectively.
Yes, of the Countess, certainly, because I think she was a very good observer, just growing up and observing the environment around her, the people around her. And I think she was also a great actress, because you have to be an actress to be a good imposter. But she was doing it for a good reason, to help and to try to survive. And after the war, the post-war, I think what you're also, as you're kind of alluding to, is that also the post-war period allowed people to reinvent themselves. And they did so in different ways. For Janina and Henry, they considered it returning to their academic roots. Both of them, they were not lying that they were academics. Both of them had PhDs in philosophy. Well, Janina claimed it was in mathematics. It was not true, because once you know kind of like the history of university degrees and the different fields of study, you know that there was no PhD specifically in mathematics. I mean, she couldn't get one. She was a woman, and the two big, great mathematicians working at the University of Lviv, Hugo Steinhaus and Stefan Banach, they did not accept women, and she was Jewish as well, so that was unheard of. But she continued her kind of maybe aspects of being an imposter when she claimed that she was actually 10 years younger than her actual age when she came to Canada. But then if we think about it, she knew that she was an immigrant, that she lost 6 years of her professional career, and would she get a job if she told the truth of how old she was at the time? So she was 10 years younger. So I think that's kind of the level of of how she was an imposter after the war. Yes, please.
Thank you for bringing this to light. And I have to say that taking off the years from the war years or more is kind of so common among survivors. But I have a specific question, others I'll ask you later on, about false identity or forging the false identity. So was there a real Countess Suchodolska that she took her position? Because this is forging something that is in books. Like, they know who's part of the Polish aristocracy. So how did they build in such an image?
A wonderful historical genealogical question. I appreciate it a lot. We don't know. We don't know for sure. There are many unknowns. So what I always say, the book is out, the story is out, and I enjoy hearing from people, and I do, from mathematics scholars, from philosophers, genealogists, who write to me and Barry saying, here is a bit of information that could help you, or, there's a whole movement of trying to understand women in the philosophical school to which Janina and Henry belonged before the war. So that's how we learn more information. But to your specific question, was there a real Countess Suchodolska or Count Suchodolski? Yes, probably. I mean, there was a family of Suchodolski from the Lublin area, and perhaps there were someone from the aristocratic circles of Count Skrzyński, knew that there was this family, and then they could forge false identities around them, but we don't know anything. We don't know anything more. We're still looking. I mean, if you have any leads.
Is there Count Suchodolski in the room?
Is there Count Suchodolski in the room? Yes. Yes, please.
So in putting these kinds of talks together, you always have to leave something out.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any particularly interesting anecdotes, stories, discoveries, things of that nature that you'd like to share that you couldn't fit into the lecture?
Well, did you see that I had my notes in front of me? There was a reason for that, because otherwise I would be talking here about all these different anecdotes, and so yes, I had to follow a certain narrative. But of course, there are many stories in the memoir, in the book, and I have to say the book is based on the memoir. All the dialogue, the conversations that are referenced in the book, they come from the memoir. We did not make anything up. I think sometimes that astonishes readers, that, how do we know this? And we're historians, why do we put in these dialogues? But they're from the memoir, but we complement it with historical context. For the reader to understand how unusual Janina's story really is. And if there are other kinds of anecdotes, well, the Christmas story was one of my favorite ones. There is also another one about bringing Easter fare to prisoners in April 1944, right before the major deportations from the camp took place to camps in Greater Germany. There is a story about a daring attempt to organize an escape of prisoners from a deportation train. And if that was successful, Janina for sure would have been disclosed as someone who was aiding the resistors. And while the SS authorities in the camp did not suspect that she was anything but a Christian Paul, they did suspect that she was involved in bringing in contraband and smuggling out reports from the camp. So, having said that, I encourage you to read the book and find out more.
Could you tell us the name of the book again, please, and when it's...
Yes, so it's called The Counterfeit Countess, the Jewish woman who rescued thousands of Poles during the Holocaust.
I think it doesn't happen often that we are leaving a Holocaust commemoration lecture with a smile, but also we've learned a great deal. Thank you, Joanna. Please join me in thanking our speakers.